Hello, everyone. This is Jean-Luc Neptune. I'm a physician and an entrepreneur here in New York City. Again, my friends call me JL. And this is part three of my series that I started on March 19th after I tested positive for COVID-19. So by popular demand, I had got a bunch of questions, a lot of people checking in on me, and I really appreciated that. And I just wanted to answer some final questions, provide some updates in terms of how I'm doing, and then give you a little bit of direction in terms of where I'm going. So first of all, how am I feeling? So the most common question that I've gotten, and I must say that on day 28 of this syndrome, I am feeling much better. Actually, in the last 3 days, things have really picked up. I'd say I'm about 90 or 95% better. And almost 100%, and I'll talk about why I'm not quite 100% yet. I was started really feeling better last week, but given the way that this virus is unpredictable in its course, I really didn't want to tempt fate, so I didn't record a video last week. Also, was dealing with a lot of fatigue last week, and again, I'll talk about that more. But definitely much improved. Cough is a much smaller part of my syndrome now. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about my symptoms. Another question that I got is people are asking me to sort of lay out the full clinical course. So as a reminder, I was diagnosed, or I was exposed on the 7th of March, started having symptoms on the 10th, developed a cough around the 13th or so, and then finally got tested on the 16th, and then tested positive on the 18th. And then I had a fever for 10 days, and my fever finally broke on the 20th. So, a pretty long course so far. And I would say that the period from like the 16th until when my fever broke, so from the time I was tested to the time my fever broke, was probably the roughest stretch. The cough was very intense at that time, had fever to 101 plus, even though I was taking, 1,000 milligrams of Tylenol every 8 hours. I actually had some wheezing, which in retrospect was pretty scary. But I'd say that I never had shortness of breath and never really had any of the high fevers that I've heard from some other people. I have a cousin who had a fever of 104. So overall, there was a rough patch, but I think I made it through. The interesting thing, and by the way, when I had the main symptoms that I had, the key things were fever, myalgias, muscle pain. I had a lot of arthralgias as well, like my joints bothered me, especially my knees, which was something that was never really been a problem before. Also had a lot of malaise and weakness. And then, since the time my fever has broken, the malaise and weakness has actually been like really the biggest part of this. And I'd say that, that period, let's say from the 20th or the 21st when my fever broke, for the next 10 days, almost 14 days, just had this almost suffocating fatigue where I was sleeping like 12 hours a day. I was sleeping 4 hours a day during the middle of the day, which is something I never do. I never sleep during the daytime. The cough is almost gone, but that's persisted for a long time. I alluded to some GI symptoms. There's been a lot of abdominal pain, a touch of nausea, lots and lots of flatulence, which I have been very surprised by. And the GI part of this, I think, has been largely underappreciated. There is a big GI component to COVID, and I definitely had that. And then I would also say that I had some almost mental fogginess, in terms of my ability to concentrate, my ability to maintain my attention. Again, that's another part of this that I don't think a lot of people are familiar with, but I think that was certainly, at least in my case, part of what I had. It's interesting. In the last 2 weeks or so, there was a big focus on, is it a good thing to let 1% of the population die, right? And I think a crazy discussion, but people were having that discussion. And there was this interesting binary between, when you get COVID-19, are you dead or are you not dead? But I think what a lot of people underappreciated is, what happens if, 5% of the population is sick for 3 weeks, which has been the case for me. And I've had some other friends who've had COVID as well. And, they've been sick for quite some time. So I think the length of this syndrome, at least in my case, has been surprising. I thought that when my fever broke, I'd snap right back, but that didn't happen. And it actually felt like part of the reason maybe I was sleeping so much and was so fatigued is that there was this immunological war going on inside me, and my troops had to recover afterwards. I had a question from a friend about residual effects. So, I haven't done a lot of exercise. I only got out of the house a couple of days ago. But, I found that I can walk up 5 flights of steps because I don't take the elevator now. Even though I may be carrying some bag of groceries or something, I'm able to walk 5 flights of steps with a mask covering my face, and I'm not really that winded. There may be longer term sequelae associated with this, and there's been some evidence that people may have some lung involvement later on down the road. I don't think it's well understood yet, but at least in the immediate term, I don't feel any more deconditioned that I might expect for, essentially 3 to 4 weeks of almost total bed rest. The one funny comment that I would make is that generally when you have a viral illness for 3 to 4 weeks, you expect to have a pretty impressive weight loss, but I've lost only about 2 pounds. So I feel cheated by this COVID in that regard. But, for the most part, I would say that I've gotten much, much better. Another question was about family. I didn't really mention them much before. Again, there's a bit of superstition in me, and I didn't want to talk too much about their courses. But my 2 sons got something in the week of the 22nd that hit them pretty hard, but they were only down for a day. And then, within a day or so, they were both back to roughhousing, video games, doing all the things that they normally do. My wife has had a milder version of what I've had. Fortunately, she's never really had a full-on fever. She's sort of been more low-grade elevation in the 99s or so. And she's been a couple of days behind me. She's probably about 5 to 7 days behind me. So she's still recuperating and, still getting better. One of the things I forgot to mention, too, about this is that over the last 2 weeks, a lot of the symptoms have really been waxing and waning. Some days you wake up, you feel great, and then by midday, the symptoms are coming back, and fatigue comes back, the cough comes back. Really, for me, in the last 3 days is when things have gone from feeling about 85-90% to being more 90-95%. We have, my assumption is that everybody in the house has had COVID. I'm the only one who's been tested, so obviously there's still a problem with testing. My assumption is that, everybody in the house has been infected by COVID-19. That said, we are still, in many ways, still treating the outside world as if we are not infected. So, we're still very, very focused on wearing masks when we go outside. We're disinfecting surfaces all the time in the house. We're getting deliveries of groceries to the house, and when we get those deliveries in, we're swabbing everything down, making sure that it's virus free. So this strange paradox that it feels like we've all been infected, but we're still treating it as if the infection is still out there. In terms of some updates on some of the other stuff that I discovered or discussed in the previous videos, testing is still a problem. I'm the only one who's been tested. From what I heard from my friends in various ERs is that they're still not testing a lot of patients. I think the only patients they're testing are the ones who are getting admitted. We compare that to, let's say, South Korea or Germany, where they've really done a good job in terms of their testing. And as a result, they have a much lower death rate, and they've been able to get back to proper economic functioning more quickly. And I think, testing is one of those things that we have to really resolve quickly. Masks, when I talked about masks last time, I expressed some skepticism about how whether the mask could prevent you from acquiring the infection. But I think that the evidence is pretty clear now that, at least in some cases, there may be some airborne transmission of the virus. the super spreader cases in New Rochelle and in Seattle indicate that that might be the case. And I think that's part of the reason that the CDC has moved toward guidance that everybody should be wearing face coverings. And again, it would be great if we could all have good, high quality masks. I have some N95 masks that I got many years ago, and I'm using that mask every time that I go out, every time I'm sort of in an enclosed space. I won't wear it so much, if I'm just outside walking and there's nobody around me. But even today, I think I was changing my habits a bit and wore a mask the entire time that I was outside. Some other things I talked about, people being asymptomatic when they were infected. I thought that number was 20% when I did my second video, but as it turns out, there's a study in Iceland that shows that up to 50% of people who were walking around with the infection were actually asymptomatic. So again, it creates even more impetus for social distancing because you don't know who's healthy and who's sick. In terms of the asymptomatic period, I think when I provided or recorded my video a while back, it was 2 to 14 days. But there's some interesting research that shows that for a group of patients, maybe 1 in 8 patients, there is more than a 14-day lag between when they get infected and when they display symptoms. And I saw one Chinese study that showed that there were at least one patient who took almost or more than a month, 33 days, to demonstrate symptoms from the time that they had a confirmed infection. And I have links to all this stuff below, and I'll put that in the description. In terms of what's next for me, so actually in probably about 8 hours or so, I'm going down to Mount Sinai, and I'm going to be participating in their convalescent plasma study. People who have been infected with COVID-19 develop antibodies, and those antibodies can be useful in treating other patients. They can actually be useful in 2 ways, treating people who are infected, and they can also be used as prophylaxis, preventing infection, which is something that I didn't know about before until today. So I'm going to be participating in that study, literally giving of myself, and hopefully my antibodies will be useful and will be able to help other people not get sick and help people who are sick be less sick. I'm also looking at some other clinical opportunities to actually to volunteer in places that have been hard hit. Obviously, I'm interested in the safety of myself and my family, and there's still a lot of unanswered questions about immunity. So part of what I'm doing tomorrow is getting my antibodies checked and making sure that I have a strong antibody titer, which I think, in addition to good PPE, which we're actually starting to get in New York now, should protect me in a way that I think is appropriate and balances risks and benefits. And then other thing I'm doing is, as many of you know, I'm launched a new venture right before the start of the pandemic. Our company is called Central Modern Recovery. We are a telemedicine based. We're also doing home-based care for people with drug and alcohol use disorders. Our website is www.hellosuntra.com, HELLOSUNTRA.com. And social isolation is very difficult for people who are in recovery, and obviously this has been probably the most severe social isolating event in our lifetimes. It's also a very stressful time because there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of uncertainty. So a lot of folks who are in recovery are having challenges. My partner Adam, who is 12 years sober, has put out a couple of videos that I have shared on my social media, some great tips and ideas on what people can do to help them in recovery, and I encourage you to check my social media to check those things out. And obviously, if there's anybody who has an issue, please feel free to hit us up at 646-906-8869, 646-906-8869, and again, that's Central Modern Recovery. And again, tomorrow morning when I get up, I'm heading over to Mount Sinai. I'll be documenting all that as much as I can, as much as they allow me to do, and my goal is to try to encourage other people who have been infected and who are in recovery to give their antibodies and to donate blood, and I think that'll be a very important part of treating people, especially in an environment where we don't have a lot of approved or well-studied treatments, and vaccine is still far away. So again, thank you to everybody who checked in. Thank you to everybody who reached out. Feeling much better, doing better, and wishing everybody on the other end the best of health, and looking forward to a time we can get back together and catch up. All right, take care. Bye bye.